The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets across the mountain plateau, each flake a tiny executioner against the exposed skin of those huddled on the auction block. Emma Mendoza pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, but the wind cut through the worn fabric like knives. Her breath came in sharp puffs of white vapor, and her fingers had long since lost all feeling. Around her, other desperate souls shifted and shivered, their eyes hollow with resignation. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd, harsh and businesslike, as if he were selling livestock rather than human beings bound by debt and desperation. Men in heavy coats examined the offerings with calculating eyes, their wealth evident in every warm garment they wore, while those on the block trembled in rags. Next we have a young woman, healthy stock, good for domestic work, or whatever else a man might require. The auctioneer's words cut through her like ice water. This was it. This was how her story would end, sold to the highest bidder like a piece of furniture. Her mother's face flashed through her mind, the woman who had died believing her daughter would find a better life than the poverty that had consumed their family. The bidding started low, insultingly low, and Emma felt what remained of her dignity crumble. Voices called out numbers, each one a nail in the coffin of her freedom. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's lullabies, the way her voice had sounded when she sang about better days coming. Then a voice cut through the others, deep and commanding, with an authority that made the other bidders fall silent. $5,000. The amount was so far beyond what anyone else had offered Fred that the auctioneer himself seemed stunned. Emma's eyes snapped open, searching the crowd for the source of that voice. He stood apart from the other men, taller and broader, with dark hair that showed silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. His coat was well made but practical, not the ostentatious display of wealth that marked the other bidders. When their eyes met across the crowd, she saw something she hadn't expected. Kindness. Not pity, not cruel hunger, but something that looked almost like understanding. Sold to Nathan Reed, the auctioneer declared. The other bidders grumbled and dispersed. Emma felt her knees buckle, but somehow she remained standing. Nathan Reed, the name meant nothing to her, but it would define the rest of her life. As the crowd began to thin, Nathan approached with measured steps. Up close, he was even more imposing, but there was no cruelty in his approach. When he reached her, he didn't grab her arm or treat her like property he'd just purchased. Instead, he simply said, "Come with me." His voice was quiet, meant for her ears alone, and there was something in it that made her want to trust him, though every instinct screamed that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. She followed him through the dispersing crowd, her bare feet finding purchase on the icy ground through pure necessity. Nathan led her to a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. Without a word, he pulled a thick blanket from the wagon bed and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth was so sudden and unexpected that tears sprang to her eyes, though they froze on her cheeks almost immediately. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rode away from the auction site, Emma stole glances at the man who now owned her. His profile was stern but not unkind, and his hands on the reins were steady and sure. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful, all white peaks and dark pine forests that stretched endlessly in every direction. "Where are you taking me?" she finally found the courage to ask. "Home," he said simply, and something in the way he said it made her think he meant more than just a destination. The wagon climbed steadily through the mountain passes, following roads carved from stone itself. Emma had never seen country like this, so remote and wild that it felt like the edge of the world. The cold was brutal, but the blanket Nathan had given her was thick and well made, and gradually she began to feel her fingers and toes again. As they rode, Nathan pointed out landmarks. "That peak there is Mount Morrison. The valley beyond it floods every spring, but the hunting is good in the fall." He spoke as if she might have reason to care about such things, as if her future might extend beyond whatever immediate use he had for her. The sun was beginning to set when they finally reached his property. Emma's first sight of Nathan's home took her breath away. It wasn't the crude cabin she had expected, but a substantial log house built into the side of the mountain itself, with smoke rising from multiple chimneys and warm light glowing in the windows. It's beautiful, she whispered, and immediately regretted the words. Nathan helped her down from the wagon, and she was surprised when her legs nearly gave out beneath her. Easy, he said quietly. You've been through enough for one day. The door opened before they reached it, and a woman appeared, her face creased with concern. Nathan, thank God you're back. I was starting to worry. The woman was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked brown hair and kind eyes. And you must be the girl. Come in, child, before you freeze to death. The warmth that enveloped Emma as she stepped inside was almost overwhelming. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, and the smell of cooking food made her stomach clench with hunger. This was a home, not just a dwelling, and Emma felt like an intruder in its warmth and comfort. Emma, this is Diane Lopez, my housekeeper, and the closest thing to family I have in these mountains, Nathan said. Diane, this is Emma Mendoza. She'll be staying with us. Diane's eyes met Emma's with understanding that needed no words. Well then, the first thing we need to do is get you warm and fed. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. Diane led her to a bedroom that was larger and more comfortable than any space Emma had ever called her own. A fire had been laid in the small fireplace, and thick rugs covered the wooden floor. The bed was piled high with quilts, and there was even a small table by the window. It was a room prepared for a guest, not a servant. There are clean clothes in the wardrobe, Diane said. They should fit well enough. Take your time getting settled, and come down to the kitchen when you're ready. When Diane left, Emma stood in the center of the room and tried to make sense of what was happening. She had been sold at auction, like property, but she was being treated like a welcomed guest. Nothing about this situation made sense. She moved to the wardrobe and opened it with trembling hands. Inside hung dresses of good quality wool and cotton, practical garments, but well-made and warm. She selected a dark blue wool dress and held it up to herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was thin and hollow-eyed, but there was still something there, some spark that hadn't been completely extinguished. The hot water in the wash basin was another luxury she hadn't expected. When she looked in the mirror again, she saw someone who might pass for respectable. When she made her way downstairs, she found Nathan and Diane in a large kitchen. Nathan had changed from his traveling clothes, and without his heavy coat, he looked younger, more approachable. The meal was simple but hearty: venison stew with vegetables, fresh bread, and a coffee that was strong and black. Emma tried to eat slowly, but she was so hungry that it was difficult not to devour everything in sight. Neither Nathan nor Diane commented on her appetite, and their conversation flowed around her in a way that was comforting rather than excluding. After supper, Diane excused herself, leaving Emma alone with Nathan in the kitchen. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Emma stared into her coffee cup, trying to find the courage to ask what was expected of her. "You're wondering why I bought you," Nathan said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she whispered. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "My wife died 3 years ago. Sarah was her name. She was everything good in this world, everything that made this place feel like home instead of just a house in the mountains. When she was gone, I thought about leaving, but I couldn't do it. This was our dream, our life together." He paused, and Emma saw pain flicker across his features. "So I stayed, and I tried to keep everything going the way she would have wanted. This house is too big for one person, too quiet. It needs life in it again." Emma felt her chest tighten with understanding. "So you want me to be her?" "No," Nathan said firmly. "I want you to be you. Sarah is gone, and nothing will bring her back. But this place needs someone who will care about it. I thought maybe you might need that too." Emma stared at him. "I don't understand. You bought me. I'm your property now." Nathan's face darkened. "I bought your debt, not you. There's a difference, Michkiyo." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded paper, placing it on the table between them. "This is the bill of sale. Your freedom papers, if you want to think of it that way." With trembling hands, Emma unfolded the document. "I don't understand. This says you paid $5,000 for me, but it also says I'm free to leave at any time." "That's right," Nathan said simply. "You can walk out that door right now if you want to. But before you do, I have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Stay here for 1 year. Help me run this place, make it a home again. At the end of that year, I'll give you the $5,000 I paid for your debt. You can go anywhere you want, do anything you want." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. "Why would you do that?" Nathan's smile was sad but genuine. "Because everyone deserves a chance to choose their own life. Because you remind me that there's still good in the world worth protecting." Emma stared at the paper in her hands. She had never been more free than she was at this moment, and yet she had never been more terrified. "What if I can't do it?" she asked. "What if I'm not good enough?" "Ugh." "Then you try again," Nathan said simply. "That's what people do when they care about something." "I'll stay," Emma said, and the words felt like a promise. "I'll try." Nathan nodded, and she saw relief in his eyes. "There are rules, boundaries that we both need to respect. You'll have your own room, your own space. This is a partnership, not ownership." They talked for another hour, working out the practical details. She would help with household tasks, learn to care for the animals, contribute to running the property. In return, she would have food, shelter, safety, and at the end of the year, the means to build whatever life she chose. When they finally said goodnight, Emma lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. This morning she had been certain that her life was over. Tonight she was lying in a warm bed with a year of honest work ahead of her and the promise of freedom at the end of it. But fairy tales weren't real, and Emma had learned not to trust in happy endings. There had to be a catch, some hidden price she would be expected to pay. She just hadn't figured out what Nathan Reed wanted from her yet. The first weeks passed in a blur of learning and adjustment. Diane proved to be a patient teacher, showing Emma the rhythms of the household and the skills she would need. The work was satisfying, the kind that produced visible results. Emma found herself taking pride in the way the floors gleamed after she had scrubbed them, in the meals she helped prepare. Nathan was often absent during the day, tending to his livestock or checking his trap lines, but he was always present for the evening meal. Their conversations gradually became more comfortable, ranging from practical matters to stories about the mountain community. Emma began to understand that Nathan was respected in these parts, not just for his success, but for his fairness. The work was hard, but Emma found that she was stronger than she had realized. Years of hardship had given her a resilience that served her well. Her hands began to develop calluses and strength. Her body began to fill out as she ate regular, hearty meals. Most importantly, her spirit began to heal. But even as she settled into routines, Emma remained wary. She watched Nathan carefully, looking for signs of the true price she would be expected to pay. She had learned not to trust kindness that came without strings attached. The test came on a night in late February when a blizzard struck with unusual fury. Emma was awakened by screaming outside, barely audible over the wind but unmistakably human and filled with terror. She threw on her robe and boots and ran downstairs, where she found Nathan already pulling on his heavy coat. "Stay inside," he commanded, but Emma was already reaching for her own coat. "If someone's in trouble, you'll need help," she said. They fought their way through the storm toward the barn. When they reached it, Nathan threw open the doors to reveal chaos. Several horses were loose in their stalls, wild-eyed with panic, and in the center of the barn floor lay a man Emma didn't recognize, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Jeffrey Morris," Nathan said, dropping to his knees beside the injured man. "What the hell are you doing out in this storm?" Jeffrey's face was gray with pain. "Horse threw me about a mile from here. Think it's broken." Nathan examined the injured leg. "It's bad. We need to get you into the house and send for the doctor." "I can set it," Emma said quietly, and both men turned to look at her in surprise. "My mother was a midwife and healer. She taught me how to deal with broken bones. I've done it before." Nathan's eyes searched her face, and she saw the moment when he decided to trust her. "What do you need?" Working together, they managed to get Jeffrey into the house and onto the kitchen table. Emma sent Nathan to gather supplies: clean cloth for bandages, wood for splints, whiskey for antiseptic and pain relief. Her hands moved with a sure competence as she examined the break. It was a clean fracture, but it would need to be set properly. Emma had Nathan hold the injured man still while she manipulated the bone back into alignment, ignoring Jeffrey's screams. It was brutal work but necessary. When the bone was properly aligned, she splinted the leg and bound it tightly. Jeffrey had passed out from the pain, which was probably a mercy. That was well done, Nathan said quietly, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Respect, maybe. My mother always said that everyone should know how to heal as well as how to hurt, Emma replied. When the doctor arrived the next day, he examined Jeffrey's leg and pronounced Emma's treatment exactly what he would have done himself. You have skilled hands, miss, he told her. Have you considered taking up healing as a profession? Emma glanced at Nathan. I haven't really thought about what I might do in the future. Right now, I'm needed here. A few days later, Nathan brought her a package. Inside were several books on medicine and healing, volumes that must have cost him considerably. I thought you might be interested in expanding your knowledge, he said simply. These must have cost a fortune, Emma said. Knowledge is never a waste of money, Nathan replied. Besides, having someone with medical skills in the area could benefit everyone. Emma understood what he was really saying. He was giving her the tools to build a future for herself, a way to be useful and respected in this community, even after their year together ended. Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the harsh landscape into something magical. The snow melted into rushing streams, and wildflowers bloomed wherever the ground was bare. Emma found herself spending every free moment outside, drinking in the beauty and promise of renewal. The garden proved to be a substantial plot behind the house, carefully planned over years of cultivation. Diane showed Emma how to prepare the soil and plant seeds, and Emma discovered that she had a natural talent for growing things. You have the touch, Diane said one afternoon as they worked together. Some people can follow all the rules and never grow anything worthwhile, but you understand what the plants need. Emma felt a flush of pride. The garden became her special domain, and she spent hours tending it, watching with fascination as tiny green shoots pushed their way up through the dark soil toward the light. As the weather warmed, neighbors began to stop by more frequently, and Emma started to understand the complex web of relationships that connected the scattered homesteads. These were people who had chosen to live far from town conveniences, but they had created their own community based on mutual aid and shared values. Emma found herself gradually being accepted into this community, not as Nathan's property, but as herself. Her medical knowledge made her valuable, and word of her skill in treating Jeffrey Morris's broken leg had spread. People began to seek her out for advice about minor ailments and injuries. One afternoon in late May, Emma was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching fast, looking back over their shoulders as if being pursued. Something about their manner set off alarm bells, and she dropped her hoe and ran toward the house. Nathan emerged from the barn just as the riders reached the yard, and Emma could see from his posture that he recognized the danger they represented. The leader was a man she had never seen before, thin and sharp-featured, with eyes that reminded her of a weasel. His clothes were expensive but travel-stained, and the gun on his hip was worn with ease. Nathan Reed, Ben, the man said. I'm David Evans, representing certain business interests in Denver. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Nathan's stance didn't change, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. I don't know what you're talking about, Evans. Evans smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made Emma's skin crawl. I'm talking about the girl Reed, Emma Mendoza. She was sold at a legal auction, but there seems to have been some irregularity in the transaction. My clients want her back. Emma felt the world tilt around her. Her past had not forgotten her, and now it had come to collect what it claimed was owed. The transaction was completely legal, Nathan said. I have all the proper documentation. Perhaps, Evans said with that unpleasant smile, but my clients feel that $5,000 was an excessive amount to pay for one woman. They suspect there might have been some collusion to defraud them of their rightful property. Emma saw Nathan's hands clench into fists. Emma Mendoza is not property. She's a free woman who chooses to work for me. Evans laughed. Oh, we did take it up with the auctioneer. Funny thing about that man, he seems to have disappeared right after the auction, along with all the money he collected. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Emma realized that Evans wasn't just here to reclaim her. He was here to destroy Nathan as well, to accuse him of fraud and conspiracy. That's a serious accusation, Nathan said quietly. I hope you have evidence to back it up. Evidence has a way of appearing when people look hard enough for it, Evans replied. But I'm a reasonable man, Reed. Just give us the girl, and we'll forget it all about any irregularities. Emma felt her new life crumbling around her. Everything she had worked for was about to be swept away by men who saw her as nothing more than a commodity. No, she said, stepping forward. I won't go with you. Evans turned his attention to her for the first time, and his eyes moved over her body in a way that made her feel dirty. You don't have a choice in the matter, girl. Actually, she does have a choice, Nathan said, and there was something in his voice that made all the riders shift uneasily. Emma is a free woman, and she's under my protection. If you want to take her, you'll have to go through me first. Before anyone could draw a weapon, the sound of more horses approaching echoed across the valley. Emma turned to see a group of riders cresting the hill, moving with purpose rather than panic. As they drew closer, she recognized several of Nathan's neighbors, men she had met during her months on the mountain. They were armed and alert, their faces grim with determination. The lead rider was Jose Ruiz, a weathered rancher whose property bordered Nathan's. He pulled up his horse just outside the circle of Evans's men and touched the brim of his hat in polite greeting. Afternoon, Nathan, he said casually. Thought we heard voices carrying on the wind. Everything all right here? Nathan's relief was carefully controlled. Just some visitors from Denver, Jose. They seem to think they have some claim on Emma. Jose's eyes moved over Evans and his men with the kind of assessment that came from years of dealing with dangerous situations. Is that so? Well, that's interesting because Emma's been a valued member of our community for months now. Helped my wife through a difficult childbirth just last week. Other voices chimed in from the assembled neighbors, each adding their own testimony to Emma's character and contributions. The picture they painted was of someone who belonged, someone who was valued not for what she could be bought and sold for, but for who she had chosen to become. Evans' smile faltered as he realized that he was no longer dealing with one isolated man and a friendless woman. He was facing an entire community that had closed ranks to protect one of their own. This is all very touching, Evans said, but it doesn't change the legal facts. The woman was sold at auction to satisfy legitimate debts. What clients would those be? Asked Noah Kelly, a man whose quiet demeanor concealed sharp intelligence. Because I've done some checking since word reached us that you were heading this way, and I can't find any record of legitimate creditors with claims on Miss Mendoza's person. Evans' face darkened. That's none of your business, Kelly. Oh, but it is my business, Noah replied mildly. You see, I used to be a lawyer before I came to these mountains. Funny thing is, David Evans, I can't find any record of you representing anyone in Denver. In fact, the only David Evans I can find with connections to that city is wanted for fraud and embezzlement. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma saw Evans's hand twitch toward his gun again, but he was now surrounded by armed men watching his every move. You're making a mistake, Evans said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. My clients have resources, connections. Your clients, Jose said with a laugh that held no humor, are about as real as a $3 bill. We know what you are, Evans. You're a scavenger, preying on people who can't fight back. Emma felt a surge of hope mixed with amazement. These people were willing to risk their own safety to protect her. It was a level of loyalty she had never experienced. Evans looked around at the circle of determined faces and seemed to realize that his scheme had failed. But Emma could see that he wasn't finished. Fine, he said with a snarl. Keep the girl. But this isn't over, Reed. Accidents happen in places like this. People disappear. Houses burn down. The threat was clear and unmistakable. Jose Ruiz spurred his horse forward, and suddenly his rifle was in his hands. The barrel pointed directly at Evans's chest. I think you've said enough, Evans. In fact, I think it's time for you and your friends to leave. The other neighbors moved their horses closer, a subtle but unmistakable show of force. Evans cursed, wheeled his horse around, and spurred it toward the valley entrance, his men following close behind. Emma watched them go with a mixture of relief and fear. The immediate threat was over. But Evans's parting words echoed in her mind. He wasn't the type to give up easily. That night, Emma sat with Nathan in the kitchen. "I should leave," she said finally. "As long as I'm here, I'm putting you and everyone else in danger." Nathan looked at her across the table. "Is that what you want to do? Leave?" Emma thought about the question. 6 months ago, she would have run at the first sign of trouble. But now the thought of leaving this place, these people who had become her community, filled her with a sense of loss that was almost physical. "No," she said quietly, "I don't want to leave. But I don't want to be responsible for anyone getting hurt because of me either." "Then don't leave," Nathan said simply. "Stay and help us figure out how to deal with Evans. You're part of this community now, Emma. That means we face problems together." The words carried a weight of acceptance and belonging that Emma had never experienced before. She was part of something larger than herself, something worth fighting for and protecting. The weeks following Evan's visit were tense with anticipation. Everyone in the valley remained alert for signs of trouble, and neighbors checked on each other more frequently than usual. Emma continued her work, but she also spent time studying the medical books Nathan had given her and treating the minor ailments that were part of life in such a remote area. Nathan had quietly increased security around the property, checking his weapons more frequently and varying his routines. The threat Evans represented was real and ongoing. The attack, when it came, was not what anyone expected. Emma was working in the garden on a warm afternoon in early July when she smelled smoke on the wind. The smell grew stronger and more acrid, and she began to hear the distant sound of crackling flames. When she looked toward the valley entrance, she saw a column of black smoke rising into the clear blue sky. She dropped her tools and ran toward the house, calling for Nathan. He emerged from the barn at a run, and together they climbed to the highest point on their property to get a better view. What they saw made Emma's blood run cold. The Kelly homestead, about 3 miles down the valley, was engulfed in flames. "Get the medical supplies," Nathan said tersely, already moving toward the horses. "We have to get down there." The ride to the Kelly place seemed to take forever. Other neighbors were converging on the scene from all directions, drawn by the smoke. By the time they arrived, the main house was a total loss, the flames too fierce for anyone to approach safely. But the family was alive. Noah Kelly stood in his yard with his wife and children, watching everything they owned go up in smoke. When he saw Nathan approaching, he walked over to meet them with determined stride. "They came about an hour ago," Noah said without preamble. "4 men, faces covered, but I recognized one of the horses. It was the same group that came to your place with Evans. They didn't even try to hide what they were doing." Emma felt sick to her stomach. This was her fault. Evans had made good on his threat, and an innocent family had paid the price. "Anyone hurt?" Nathan asked. "No, thank God," Noah replied. "We were all outside when they came. If we'd been inside—" He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. Other neighbors arrived throughout the afternoon, bringing food, clothing, and offers of shelter. Emma watched in amazement as the community mobilized to help the Kellys rebuild their lives. "He's trying to divide us," Jose Ruiz said during an impromptu meeting, "make us choose between protecting Emma and protecting our own families." "Maybe it should work," Emma said quietly, and all eyes turned to her. "Maybe the smart thing would be for me to leave. Then Evans would have no reason to target anyone else." The silence was heavy with consideration. She could see that some of the men were thinking the same thing. But it was Noah Kelly who spoke first, the man whose home had just been destroyed. "No," he said firmly. "That's exactly what Evans wants. He wants us to turn on each other, to start seeing Emma as the problem instead of seeing him as the enemy." "Noah's right," Nathan said. "This isn't about Emma anymore. It's about whether we're going to let people like Evans terrorize us into submission." The discussion continued, but Emma could see that the community's resolve was hardening rather than weakening. Evans had made a strategic error by targeting the Kellys. Instead of dividing the community, he had united them in anger and determination. As people started to disperse, Emma found herself walking with Nathan back toward their horses. The weight of guilt was still heavy on her shoulders, but it was mixed now with something else. Gratitude, perhaps, or the beginning of real courage. "Thank you," she said quietly as they mounted their horses. "For what?" Nathan asked. "For not letting me run away," Emma replied. "For believing I was worth fighting for, even when I didn't believe it myself." Nathan's smile was gentle but determined. Everyone deserves to have people who will fight for them, Emma. The trick is learning to fight for yourself too. Emma realized that something fundamental had changed in her. She was no longer just a victim of circumstances. She was becoming someone who could choose to stand and fight, someone who had found something worth defending. The retaliation came 3 days later, and it was both more personal and more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Emma was treating a neighbor's infected wound in the kitchen when Nathan burst through the door, his face grim with urgency. Behind him came Jose Ruiz and two other men, their expressions equally serious. "We need to talk," Nathan said without preamble. Emma finished bandaging her patient's arm and sent him on his way. When they were alone, Nathan closed and barred the door. "Evans has been busy," Jose said, settling into a chair. "He's been spreading word in Denver and the surrounding towns that there is a reward for Emma's capture. $500, dead or alive." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. $500 was enough money to tempt desperate men to travel considerable distances and take significant risks. "There's more," Nathan said quietly. "He's also been telling people that Emma is wanted for murder, that she killed a man in Denver and fled to avoid prosecution. He's got forged documents that look official enough to fool most people." Emma felt the room spinning around her. Not only was she now a target for bounty hunters, but she was also a fugitive from the law, at least on paper. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Hard to say," replied one of the men. "Word is spreading fast, but it'll take time for bounty hunters to organize. Maybe a week, maybe less." Emma looked around the table at the faces of the men who had risked so much to protect her. "I have to leave," she said firmly. "Tonight. If I'm gone when they get here, they'll have no reason to bother any of you." "Where will you go?" Nathan asked. "Evans has made sure that you'll be hunted wherever you are." "I'll figure something out," Emma said, though she had no idea what that might be. "Or maybe there's another way," said the second stranger, a man who had been quietly listening. He was younger than the others, with intelligent eyes and respectable clothes. "My name is Noah Reed, Nathan's cousin from back east. I'm a lawyer, and I've been looking into Evans' operation." Emma felt a flicker of hope, though she tried not to let it grow too large. "Evans is running a sophisticated con game," Noah continued. "He buys up debts from desperate people, usually paying a fraction of what they're worth. Then he uses intimidation, fraud, and sometimes violence to collect far more than the debts are legitimately worth." "So what does that mean for Emma?" Nathan asked. "It means that the charges against her are almost certainly fabricated. But proving that will take time we don't have," Noah replied. "However, there might be another option. If we can prove that Evans is engaged in a pattern of fraud and extortion, we can get the territorial authorities to investigate him instead of Emma." Emma felt her heart sink. Legal maneuvers could take months, and she didn't have that kind of time. "There's something else," Noah said. "I've been in contact with a federal marshal named Sarah Smith who specializes in cases involving interstate fraud and corruption. She's been tracking Evans for months. If we can give her enough evidence to move against him, she might be able to get the charges against Emma dropped and put Evans behind bars." "What kind of evidence?" Jose asked. "Testimony from his victims, documentation of his fraudulent practices, proof that he's been using forged documents," Noah replied. "The problem is that most of his victims are too scared to come forward." Emma thought about all the people who had been at the auction where she was sold, the desperate men and women who had been forced to put themselves up for sale. How many of them had been victims of Evans' schemes? "I'll testify," she said suddenly. "I'll tell this marshal everything I know about Evans and what he did to me." Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. "It's dangerous, Emma. If Evans finds out that you're cooperating with federal authorities, he'll do everything in his power to stop you." "I'm already worse off than I can afford to be," Emma replied. "At least this way, I'm fighting back instead of just running and hiding." The decision brought with it a strange sense of peace. Emma had spent so much of her life being acted upon that it felt liberating to finally take control of her own fate. Noah nodded approvingly. "Marshal Smith is already on her way here. She should arrive within the next few days. In the meantime, we need to make sure Emma stays safe and hidden." The rest of the evening was spent making plans and preparations. Emma would stay close to the house, never venturing out alone. The neighbors would take turns keeping watch, and weapons were cleaned and loaded. It felt like preparing for a siege, which in many ways it was. As the meeting broke up, Emma found herself alone with Nathan in the kitchen, where so many of their important conversations had taken place. "Are you scared?" Nathan asked quietly. Emma considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally, "but not in the way I used to be. I used to be scared of what other people might do to me. Now I'm scared of failing, of not being strong enough or brave enough to see this through." Nathan smiled, and there was pride in his expression. That's the difference between being a victim and being a fighter. Victims fear what will happen to them. Fighters fear not doing enough to protect what matters to them. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I want you to know that this year has been the best of my life. You gave me something I never thought I could have." "What's that?" Nathan asked. "A choice," Emma replied. "The chance to decide who I wanted to be instead of just accepting who other people said I was." Marshal Sarah Smith arrived on a gray morning when low clouds hung heavy over the mountains. She came alone, riding a sturdy horse and carrying herself with quiet confidence. Emma watched from the kitchen window as Nathan went out to meet her, and she was surprised by how ordinary the federal marshal looked. It was only when she dismounted that the marshal's true nature became apparent. She moved with fluid grace, always ready for trouble, and her eyes constantly swept the surrounding area. The gun on her hip was worn with the ease of frequent use. Nathan brought her into the house, and Emma found herself face to face with the woman who might hold the key to her future. Sarah Smith was perhaps 40 years old, with prematurely gray hair and eyes the color of winter sky. "Miss Mendoza," she said without preamble, "I understand you're willing to testify against David Evans and his organization. Before we go any further, I need you to understand what that means. These people are dangerous, and they have resources that extend far beyond what you've seen here." Emma met the marshal's gaze steadily. "I'm already at risk. At least this way I might be able to do some good." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. Now I need you to tell me everything you know about Evans, starting from the beginning." For the next several hours, Emma recounted her story in excruciating detail. She told Sarah about the circumstances that had led to her being sold at auction, about the other people she had seen there who were clearly in similar desperate situations. She described Evans's behavior and that of his associates, the threats he had made, and the pattern of intimidation that had followed. Sarah listened intently, occasionally asking questions. She took detailed notes, and Emma could see that she was building a comprehensive picture of Evans's operation. "This is consistent with what I've been hearing from other sources," Sarah said finally. "Evans has been running the same scheme in multiple territories, always staying just ahead of the law. The problem is that he's careful to cover his tracks." "What do you need from me?" Emma asked. "Your testimony will be crucial, but I need more than just your word against his," Sarah replied. "I need documentary evidence, witness corroboration, and ideally some way to catch him in the act. That's where things get complicated." Nathan leaned forward. "What do you have in mind?" Sarah's smile was sharp and predatory. "Evans is planning something big. My sources tell me he's been buying up debt contracts all across the territory, preparing for a massive auction that will net him hundreds of thousands of dollars. The auction is scheduled to take place in 2 weeks. If we can document what happens there and get testimony from the victims, we'll have enough evidence to put him away." Emma felt her stomach clench. "You want me to go to the auction?" "I want you to help me expose what Evans is really doing," Sarah corrected. "It's dangerous, and I won't lie to you about that, but it's also our best chance to stop him." The plan that Sarah outlined was both simple and terrifying. Mon would attend the auction, not as a victim, but as a witness, accompanied by undercover federal agents who would document everything. Her presence would likely provoke Evans into revealing his true methods. "He'll recognize me," Emma pointed out. "The moment he sees me, he'll know something is wrong." "That's what I'm counting on," Sarah replied. "Men like Evans can't resist the opportunity to gloat over their victims. When he does, we'll have him on record." Nathan shook his head firmly. "It's too dangerous. If something goes wrong, Emma will be completely exposed." Emma looked at him with gratitude and affection, but also with determination. It's not your choice to mom, Nathan. This is my decision, and I've already made it. The argument that followed was intense but brief. Nathan clearly wanted to protect Emma, but he also understood that she had the right to make her own choices. Sarah remained neutral, making it clear that the decision was entirely Emma's. In the end, Emma's resolve won out. She would attend the auction as part of Sarah's operation, wearing a concealed recording device. Federal agents would be positioned throughout the crowd, ready to intervene if necessary, but Emma would be essentially on her own until the evidence was gathered. The 2 weeks of preparation were among the most intense of Emma's life. Sarah coached her on how to behave at the auction, how to provoke Evans into revealing his true nature without putting herself in immediate danger. She learned to use the recording equipment, practiced her cover story, and memorized the faces of the agents who would be watching over her. Nathan was supportive, but clearly worried. He had become protective of her in a way that went beyond mere responsibility, and the thought of her deliberately walking into danger was clearly eating at him. The night before the auction, Emma sat in her room and tried to prepare herself mentally. Tomorrow she would face the man who had terrorized her and her friends, who had destroyed the Kelly family's home and threatened the safety of everyone she cared about. She would look him in the eye and dare him to do his worst, knowing that federal agents were recording every word. She was scared, but it was the clean fear of someone who had chosen her own path, rather than the desperate terror of a victim with no options. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would face it as herself, as the person she had chosen to become. The auction site was a temporary settlement in a valley between two mountain ranges, accessible by several routes but isolated enough that Evans could control who came and went. Emma arrived with Sarah's team in the early morning, posing as the representative of a wealthy Denver businessman looking to acquire domestic servants. The scene was heartbreakingly familiar. Dozens of desperate people huddled in makeshift shelters, waiting to be sold to pay debts they couldn't otherwise satisfy. Men, women, and even some children stood in groups, their faces hollow with resignation. The sight made Emma's chest tight with anger and determination. Evans was there holding court near the auction platform like a king surveying his domain. He looked prosperous and confident, dressed in expensive clothes and surrounded by associates who deferred to his every word. Emma watched him from a distance, noting how he moved among the people who were about to be sold, examining them like livestock. The federal agents were positioned throughout the crowd, invisible among the legitimate buyers and curiosity seekers. Sarah herself was dressed as a ranchwoman from a neighboring territory, her badge and gun hidden. Emma took comfort in knowing they were there, but she understood that she was essentially on her own until the evidence was gathered. The auction began at noon, and Emma forced herself to watch as human beings were sold to the highest bidder. Each sale was a small tragedy, a life reduced to its monetary value. She recognized some of the people on the platform, faces from her own auction months earlier. It was during the third hour that Evans finally noticed her. Emma saw the moment of recognition in his eyes, followed quickly by surprise and then calculation. He spoke quietly to one of his associates, who began moving through the crowd toward her position. Well, Evans said as he approached. Emma Mendoza, I have to admit, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you were hiding up in the mountains with your protector. Emma turned to face him with as much composure as she could manage. I go where I please, Mr. Evans. This is still a free country, isn't it? Evans laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Free for some people, maybe, but not for you, my dear. You see, you're still wanted for murder in Denver, and there's still a substantial reward for your capture. Maybe because the people around here know a fraud when they see one, Emma replied. Evans's face darkened. You've got a lot of nerve, girl, coming here and talking to me like that. Do you have any idea how easy it would be for me to have you dragged back to Denver in chains? About as easy as it was for you to forge those murder charges in the first place, Emma said, and she saw Evans's eyes widen slightly at the accuracy of her accusation. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Evans making increasingly explicit threats and admissions about his methods. Emma could see that he was enjoying the opportunity to intimidate her, to demonstrate his power. His arrogance was making him careless, and he was saying things that would be devastating in a courtroom. But the situation was also becoming increasingly dangerous. Evans's associates were moving closer, and Emma could see that they were armed and ready for trouble. The crowd around them was growing larger as people noticed the confrontation. It was then that everything went wrong. One of the federal agents, perhaps sensing that Emma was in immediate danger, moved too quickly to get closer to her position. Evans's trained eye caught the movement, and his expression changed from arrogant confidence to deadly alertness. "Federal agents," he said quietly to his associates, and suddenly guns were appearing in hands throughout his organization. The auction site erupted into chaos as Evans's men began shooting. The crowd scattered in all directions, screaming and diving for cover. Emma found herself caught in the middle of a gunfight, with bullets whining past her head and the sound of gunfire echoing off the surrounding mountains. Sarah appeared at Emma's side as if from nowhere, her own gun drawn. "Stay low and follow me," she shouted over the noise. "We need to get you out of here." But Evans had other plans. Even as his organization crumbled under the assault of federal agents, he kept his focus on Emma, clearly determined to settle his score with her before he was captured or killed. Emma saw him moving through the chaos toward her position, his gun in his hand and murder in his eyes. "This is all your fault," he snarled as he raised his weapon. "You couldn't just accept your place, could you?" Emma looked into the barrel of Evan's gun and felt a strange calm settle over her. She had done what she came to do. The recording equipment had captured everything, and Evans's organization was being dismantled even as he prepared to kill her. Whatever happened next, she had struck a blow for justice. But Nathan Reed had other ideas about how Emma's story should end. Nathan appeared behind Evans like a force of nature, moving with the deadly silence of a man who had spent years hunting in the mountains. Emma saw him an instant before Evans did, saw the grim determination on his face as he closed the distance. The confrontation Emma had been dreading was finally at hand. Evans spun around at the last second, warned by some instinct. His gun swung toward Nathan, but Nathan was already inside his guard, one powerful hand clamping down on Evans's wrist while the other drove into his solar plexus with devastating force. Evans doubled over, gasping, and his gun fell from nerveless fingers. "You made a mistake coming after her," Nathan said quietly. "Emma is under my protection, and that means something in these mountains." Evans tried to speak, but Nathan's grip on his wrist was like iron. Emma could see that Evans was finally understanding what he was up against. "The recording got everything I mean. I should think that Emma said, looking down at Evans. "Your threats, your admissions, your whole operation. It's over." Sarah Smith appeared beside them, her gun trained on Evans. Around them, the gunfight was winding down as federal agents overwhelmed the remnants of Evans' organization. Most of his associates were dead or captured. "David Evans," Sarah said formally, "you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, kidnapping, and conspiracy." As Sarah led Evans away in shackles, Emma felt a strange mixture of relief and anticlimax. The man who had terrorized her was finally in custody, his criminal organization destroyed. Justice had been served, but the victory felt less satisfying than she had expected. Perhaps it was because she understood now that Evans had never really been the source of her problems. He had been a symptom of a system that treated people like property. Stopping him was important, but it wouldn't change the fundamental inequalities that had made his crimes possible. Nathan seemed to understand her thoughts. As they walked away from the auction site, he said quietly, "You know this doesn't solve everything, don't you? There will be other men like Evans, other people who need help." Emma nodded, looking back at the people who had been destined for the auction block and were now free to make their own choices. "I know, but maybe we can help them too. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do with the life we've built together." The word "together" hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither had been willing to voice before. Emma realized that somewhere in the midst of all the danger and uncertainty, she had stopped thinking of Nathan as her employer and started thinking of him as her partner. "About that $5,000, Nathan said as they reached their horses. "The offer still stands. You've more than earned your freedom." Emma looked at him, this man who had saved her from slavery and given her the chance to discover who she really was. She thought about the life she could build with $5,000, the places she could go. But she also thought about the garden she had planted, the neighbors who had become her friends, the sense of belonging she had found. What if what I want is to stay? She asked quietly. What if the life I want to build is here, with you? Nathan's smile was like sunrise after a long night. Then I'd say you're welcome to stay as long as you want. Not as my employee, but as my partner. As someone who chooses to be here because this is where she belongs. Emma felt tears running down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. She had started this journey as a piece of property on an auction block, certain that her life was over. She was ending it as a free woman who had chosen her own path and found her own place in the world. The ride back to the mountain valley was peaceful, a stark contrast to the violence of the morning. Emma and Nathan rode side by side, comfortable in each other's company, and in the knowledge that they had faced the worst and emerged stronger. The mountains around them were beautiful in the afternoon light, and Emma realized that this harsh, demanding landscape had become more than just her home. It had become the place where she had discovered who she was meant to be. As they crested the final hill and saw Nathan's house spread out below them, Emma thought about all the people who would benefit from Evan's capture. The federal investigation would free dozens of people from fraudulent debts and expose the network of corruption that had made such exploitation possible. It wasn't a complete victory against injustice, but it was a significant step. But perhaps more importantly, Emma had proven to herself that she was capable of fighting for what mattered to her. She had found the courage to stand up to her oppressors, the strength to protect the people she cared about, and the wisdom to choose love over fear when it mattered most. That evening, as they sat together in the kitchen where so many of their important conversations had taken place, Emma finally understood what freedom really meant. It wasn't just the absence of chains or the ability to go wherever she pleased. It was the power to choose who she wanted to be and the courage to become that person regardless of the obstacles. So what do we do now? Nathan asked. Emma looked around the kitchen at the home they had built together and the life they had created from the ashes of their individual tragedies. She thought about the garden that would need tending in the spring, the neighbors who would continue to need medical care, the community that had accepted her as one of their own. Most of all, she thought about the man sitting across from her, who had given her everything she needed to save herself and asked for nothing in return except the chance to share his life with her. Now we live, Emma said simply. We build something good together, and we help other people do the same. We prove that there's still hope in the world, still people willing to fight for what's right. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand, and Emma felt the warmth spread through her entire body. They had both lost so much, had both suffered in ways that had nearly broken them, but they had found each other, and they had discovered that love could grow even in the harshest soil if it was tended with care and protected with courage. Outside, snow began to fall again, but Emma no longer felt the cold as a threat. Winter was just another season to be endured, another challenge to be met with determination and mutual support. She had learned that she was strong enough to survive whatever came, wise enough to know when to fight and when to forgive, and fortunate enough to have found someone who valued her for who she was. The woman who had stood on an auction block in the snow, certain that her life was over, was gone forever. In her place was someone Emma was proud to be, a healer, a fighter, a partner, and a free woman who had chosen her own destiny. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for, and it was only the beginning of the story she would write with her own hands and her own choices. As the snow continued to fall and the fire crackled in the hearth, Emma Mendoza looked toward the future with hope and determination. She had found her place in the world, and she intended to make the most of it. The mountains had tested her and found her worthy, and she would spend the rest of her life proving that their faith in her had not been misplaced.